The detention center on Kepler 442b hummed with the usual sounds of alien machinery. Guard Captain Zextai clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as he reviewed the morning reports. The facility housed over 3,000 beings from various species across the galaxy, all awaiting processing for minor infractions against Galactic Union law. What made today different was the new shipment that had arrived during the night cycle. 12 humans from a transport vessel that had allegedly violated shipping regulations near the Proxima sector. Zextai had dealt with humans before. They were a relatively new species to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 rotations ago. Most were compliant, if somewhat emotional. These particular humans, however, were unusual. They were all juveniles. The captain's second-in-command, a tall Vegan named Courtwin, approached with obvious concern. "Sir, we need to discuss the human prisoners. What about them?" Zextai asked, not looking up from his datapad. "They're children, sir. The oldest appears to be no more than 16 standard years. The youngest looks to be around 8. Zextai finally raised his eyes. "Children?" The manifest listed them as standard detainees. There was an error in the documentation. The transport was a school vessel on an educational trip. They strayed into restricted space by accident, when their navigation system malfunctioned. The captain considered this information. In Galactic Union protocol, age was rarely a factor in detention procedures. Most species reached cognitive maturity much earlier than humans, and the concept of extended childhood protection was largely foreign to galactic law. Process them according to standard procedures, he decided. Age is irrelevant under Union regulations. Courtwin shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I've been reading about human development patterns. Their young require different treatment than adult specimens. Perhaps we should contact the human embassy before proceeding." "Absolutely not," Zextai snapped. "We follow protocol. No exceptions." What the captain didn't know was that news of the detention had already reached human space through emergency broadcast channels that the damaged school ship had managed to transmit before being captured. The message was simple but devastating. Mayday. Children taken. Kepler Detention Facility. Within hours, every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost had received the transmission. The response was immediate and unprecedented in galactic history. On Earth, President Chen Martinez stood before an emergency session of the Human Council, her face pale but determined. "They have our children," she said simply. 12 innocent kids on a school trip. The room erupted. Voices rose in anger, in fear, in desperate planning. But beneath it all was something else. Something that made even the most diplomatic humans clench their fists and feel an ancient fire kindle in their chests. Admiral Sarah Okafor, the highest-ranking officer in the Human Defense Fleet, stood slowly. "Madam President, I request permission to mobilize the entire fleet." "For 12 children?" asked Commerce Minister Yuki Tanaka. Surely a diplomatic solution would be more appropriate. The Admiral's eyes were hard as steel. "Sir, with respect, you don't understand what they've done. In human history, there is no greater taboo than harming our young. They've just triggered every protective instinct our species possesses." President Martinez nodded grimly. "Explain." "Madam President, humans are unique among galactic species in our extended care of offspring. Most alien children reach independence within a few rotations. Human children remain dependent for nearly 2 decades. This has created evolutionary programming that runs deeper than conscious thought. When human children are threatened, we don't think rationally. We react." Ambassador Elena Vasquez, recently returned from the Centauri negotiations, leaned forward. "What are you saying, Admiral?" "I'm saying that every human within 1,000 light years is already moving toward that detention center. Military ships, civilian transports, private vessels, cargo haulers, they're not waiting for orders. They're not considering consequences. Right now, there are probably maintenance workers stealing shuttles and farmers hijacking freight ships. The entire human diaspora is about to converge on Kepler 442b. As if to confirm her words, Communication Officer James Park burst into the chamber. "Madam President, we're receiving reports from across human space. Unauthorized fleet movements everywhere. The civilian ship Lucky Strike has already broken orbit from Tau Ceti without clearance. The military patrol group Delta 7 has abandoned their patrol route and is heading toward Kepler space. Ma'am, we've got over 200 human vessels in motion, and the number is growing exponentially." President Martinez closed her eyes. "How long until they reach the detention center?" The fastest ships could arrive within 18 hours, Admiral Okafor replied. But ma'am, that's not the real problem. What do you mean? The real problem is what happens when they get there. These aren't coordinated military units following rules of engagement. This is an entire species responding to a genetic imperative to protect their young. They're going to demand those children back, and if the aliens refuse... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Minister Tanaka was frantically checking his communication device. I'm getting reports from our trade partners. The Centaurians are asking why our merchant fleet just abandoned their scheduled deliveries. The Vegan Confederation wants to know why our diplomats are leaving their posts. The entire galactic community is starting to notice unusual human behavior. Ambassador Vasquez stood up. We need to get ahead of this. If we don't establish communication with our own people before they reach that facility, this could spiral into the first interspecies war in galactic history. Admiral Okafor nodded grimly, and it would be a war unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. Because this wouldn't be about territory or resources or politics. This would be about children, and humans fighting for their children don't surrender, don't negotiate, and don't stop until their young are safe. President Martinez activated the emergency broadcast system. This is President Martinez to all human vessels and colonies. We are aware of the situation on Kepler 442b. Do not take independent action. Repeat, do not take independent action. We are pursuing diplomatic solutions. Communication Officer Park shook his head. Ma'am, most of the ships aren't responding to communication attempts. They're running silent and maintaining course. The President looked around the room at the faces of her advisors, seeing her own helpless anger reflected in their expressions. Somewhere in a detention center on a distant world, 12 human children were probably scared, confused, and crying for their parents, and an entire species was coming to get them back. How long? She asked quietly. Until our nearest military units reach Kepler space? 16 hours, ma'am. Then we have 16 hours to prevent a war. The first sign that something was wrong came from the orbital monitoring station above Kepler 442b. Sensor technician Velmora, a young Centaurian with excellent pattern recognition skills, noticed the anomalies during her routine scan of local space. Supervisor Keklan, she called across the control room. I'm detecting unusual hyperspace signatures approaching our system. Supervisor Keklan, a seasoned officer with decades of experience monitoring galactic traffic, didn't look up from his administrative reports. Cargo convoy? No, sir. The signatures are strange. Multiple vessels, various classes, but they're not following standard shipping lanes. They're all converging on our location from different vectors. Now Cheklan paid attention. Converging traffic patterns usually indicated either a massive commercial event or military action. Either was scheduled for the Kepler system. How many vessels? Velamora's tentacles twitched nervously as she recalibrated her sensors.
Sir, the count keeps changing.
I'm reading at least 50 contacts, but more keep appearing. They're dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Show me. The main display screen flickered to life, showing a three-dimensional map of the Kepler system. Dozens of small dots were appearing along the outer rim, each representing a spacecraft that had just completed a faster-than-light jump. As they watched, more appeared. What's their point of origin? Cheklan asked. That's what's strange, sir. They're coming from everywhere. Human space mainly, but from dozens of different systems. Sol, Proxima, Tau Ceti, Wolf 359, Kepler 452b, even some from as far as the Vega colonies. Cheklan felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. All human vessels? Yes, sir. And they're all heading directly for our planet. Meanwhile, on the detention center's lower levels, 12-year-old Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small viewport in their holding cell. The metal walls were cold and the air smelled strange, like ozone and something chemical he couldn't identify. I want to go home, whispered 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, curled up in the corner with tears streaming down her face. 16-year-old Alex Thompson, the oldest of the group, tried to maintain composure for the younger kids. It's going to be okay. Our parents know where we are. Someone will come for us. How do you know? Asked 10-year-old David Kim. Alex looked around at the scared faces of his classmates. They'd been on the most exciting trip of their young lives, visiting the outer colonies as part of their advanced placement xenosociology class. The plan had been to observe alien cultures, learn about galactic society, and return home with stories to tell for the rest of their lives. Instead, their ship's navigation had malfunctioned. They'd strayed into restricted space, and now they were prisoners on an alien world. Because, Alex said with more confidence than he felt, no one messes with human kids and gets away with it. My dad told me stories about how humans react when children are in danger. We don't give up. We don't negotiate. We come and get our kids back. Above them, Guard Captain Zexthai was beginning to understand that his routine detention operation had become something unprecedented. His communication officer had just handed him a report that made his mandibles click in confusion. "Sir, we're receiving transmission requests from over 60 human vessels. They're demanding immediate communication with you." 60 vessels? Zexthai couldn't hide his shock. "What kind of vessels?" "Mixed fleet, sir. Military patrol ships, civilian transports, cargo haulers, even what appears to be a converted mining vessel. They're taking positions throughout the system. This was highly irregular. Typically, if there was a diplomatic issue with detained aliens, a single embassy ship would arrive to negotiate. Sometimes, if the matter was serious, a small naval squadron might accompany them. But 60 ships? What do they want?" "They're demanding the immediate release of the human juveniles, sir." Zexthai's training kicked in. He'd been a detention facility commander for 15 rotations and had dealt with every kind of diplomatic pressure imaginable. The key was to follow protocol and never show weakness. "Inform them that all detainees are being processed according to Galactic Union regulations. No special treatment is authorized." The communication officer hesitated. "Sir, they're also transmitting detailed information about human child development, legal precedents from Earth law regarding juvenile protection, and something called the Geneva Convention." "I don't care about their local customs," Zexthai snapped. "Galactic law is clear. Age is not a factor in detention procedures." What he didn't understand was that 3 more human fleets had just dropped out of hyperspace. The civilian cargo ship, Prairie Wind, had been hauling grain to the Vegan colonies when its captain received the emergency broadcast. Without hesitation, he'd dumped his cargo, altered course, and was now approaching Kepler space with a hold full of armed farmers who'd insisted on coming along. The military destroyer Indomitable had been on routine patrol near Wolf 359 when her crew heard the news. Captain Maria Santos had put it to a vote, knowing that abandoning their patrol violated every regulation in the book. The vote was unanimous. They were going to get those kids. Even more surprising was the response from human civilians throughout the galaxy. Dr. James Wright, a respected xenobiologist working on a research station in the Vega system, had commandeered a shuttle and was making his way toward Kepler space, despite having no military training and no plan beyond get the children back. On the Luna research station, Professor Sarah Kim had rallied her colleagues and hijacked a supply ship. "Those are our children," she'd said simply, and no one had argued. Back in the detention center, the 12 human children had been moved to a larger holding area. After complaints from other detainees about their crying, the aliens didn't understand that human children made noise when distressed. Most alien young were silent when afraid. Emma had finally stopped crying and was now clinging to Marcus, who was trying to teach her a game their teacher had shown them about counting stars. David was attempting to communicate with a young Zentarian in the next cell, sharing his ration bar despite their captor's disapproval. Alex stood by the viewport, watching ships appear in the sky above them. He couldn't identify the designs, but something about their formation patterns looked familiar. Aggressive. Purposeful. "Guys," he said quietly, "I think someone's coming for us. In orbit." Supervisor Keklan was staring at his tactical display in growing alarm. The number of human vessels had passed 100 and showed no signs of stopping. Worse, they weren't maintaining standard defensive formations or following normal diplomatic protocols. "Sir," Felmore reported, "the human vessels are establishing a blockade formation around our planet. No ships are being allowed to enter or leave the system without their permission." "They can't do that. This is Union space." "Sir, I don't think they care about jurisdictional protocols. They're also broadcasting a message on all frequencies." "What message?" "Just 2 words, sir. Our children." Cheklin felt a chill run through his exoskeleton as he began to understand what he was witnessing. This wasn't a diplomatic mission or even a military operation. This was something else entirely. Something primal and terrifying that the galaxy had never seen before. An entire species had mobilized not for territory or resources or political advantage, but for 12 children they'd never met, and they were just getting started. The Galactic Union Emergency Council convened in unprecedented haste aboard the diplomatic station orbiting Rigel Prime. Representatives from 12 major species materialized via hologram as reports poured in from across known space about the human mobilization. Chancellor Vextari of the Zentorian Confederacy called the session to order, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "We are here to address the crisis developing in the Kepler system. Ambassador Thelquin, please provide your assessment." The Vegan representative, a tall figure with crystalline features, activated his data display. "The situation is beyond anything in our diplomatic archives. Our monitoring stations report that human vessels continue arriving in Kepler space. Current count exceeds 200 ships of various classifications. 200 ships for 12 juvenile detainees," interjected Representative Colmath of the Rigelian Empire. "This response is completely disproportionate." Ambassador Thelquin's crystalline features flickered with what humans might interpret as concern. "That's not the most troubling aspect. Our intelligence suggests this mobilization was not ordered by human government authorities. These vessels are responding to something called emergency broadcast protocols that appear to activate when human offspring are threatened." Council member Zorthak, representing the Andromedan Trade Alliance, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting this is an autonomous response? That human vessels are acting without central command?" "Precisely. What we're witnessing appears to be a species-wide defensive reaction triggered by perceived threats to their young. Our xenobiologists have been analyzing human evolutionary patterns, and the data is disturbing." The holographic display showed comparative charts between human child-rearing patterns and those of other galactic species. Most of our species reach cognitive and physical maturity within 2 to 4 rotations of birth. Human offspring remain dependent for nearly 20 rotations. This has created unprecedented evolutionary pressure for child protection. Representative Colmath waved dismissively. "Evolutionary psychology is irrelevant. These are civilized beings operating spacecraft and energy weapons. They can control their impulses, can they?" Thelquin challenged. "Our researchers have discovered disturbing patterns in human historical records. When their children are threatened, humans demonstrate remarkable disregard for personal safety, diplomatic consequences, or rational cost-benefit analysis. They have documented cases where individual humans have fought creatures 50 times their size to protect offspring. We have records of human parents walking into fires, diving into dangerous waters, and standing down armed opponents with nothing but determination." Chancellor Vexitari's mandibles clicked nervously. "What are you recommending?" "Immediate release of the human juveniles and formal apology for the detention error." The council chamber erupted in protests from multiple representatives. "Absolutely not." Colmath's voice rose above the others. "If we capitulate to this show of force, it sets a precedent that any species can ignore Galactic Union authority by bringing enough ships." "This isn't about precedent," Thelquin replied coldly. "This is about survival." Meanwhile, in the Kepler system, the human fleet had grown to proportions that defied all previous understanding of rapid deployment capabilities. Ships continued arriving hourly, not just from human military commands but from civilian populations throughout human space. Captain Elena Vasquez aboard the destroyer Righteous Fury found herself unofficially commanding the largest human naval formation in history, despite having no authorization to do so. Her ship had been the first military vessel to arrive, and other captains had simply begun following her orders. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving status updates from arriving vessels. The cargo hauler Lucky Strike reports she's carrying 47 volunteers armed with mining equipment. The transport New Horizon has 63 parents whose children attend the same school system as the detainees." "Armed volunteers?" Captain Vasquez felt a chill. "Are these people insane?" Her first officer, Commander James Park, shook his head grimly. "No, ma'am. They're human. Every parent in the fleet is thinking the same thing we are. What if those were my kids down there?" The tactical display showed the steady stream of arriving vessels. Military ships, civilian transports, even converted mining vessels and agricultural haulers. Each carried people who had dropped everything they were doing to respond to an emergency broadcast about children they'd never met. "Ma'am," the communications officer continued, "we're also receiving reports from non-military vessels that they're experiencing equipment malfunctions." "What kind of malfunctions?" "Their weapon systems keep mysteriously activating and targeting the planet. The civilian ships claim they can't shut them down." Captain Vasquez almost smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Her people were finding creative ways around regulations prohibiting civilian vessels from carrying weapons. If their mining lasers and industrial cutters happened to be pointed at the detention facility, well, that was clearly a technical malfunction. On the planet's surface, Guard Captain Zexthai was discovering that his routine detention operation had become the focus of galactic attention. His superior, Facility Commander Corvain, had arrived from the regional headquarters with an escort of Union security forces. "Explain to me," Commander Corvain demanded, "how a simple processing error has resulted in over 200 human vessels blockading this system." Zexthai clicked his mandibles nervously. "Sir, the human juveniles were processed according to standard protocol. Their age was not considered a relevant factor." "Not relevant?" Corvain's voice rose to a screech. "You detained the offspring of a species that apparently considers such acts to be grounds for war. Sir, with respect, how are we supposed to know that humans react differently to offspring detention than other species?" Commander Corvain pulled up the facility's communication logs on his datapad. "Because they've been sending us detailed explanations for the past 6 hours. Educational materials about human child development, legal frameworks from their species' legal codes, psychological studies about parental protective instincts, and increasingly threatening messages about what they intend to do if their children aren't released immediately." In the detention area, the 12 human children had been moved to a secure wing after other detainees complained about the constant stream of visitors. Word had spread throughout the facility that the small humans were the cause of the orbital blockade, and curiosity was running high. A young Zentarian technician named Velmora had volunteered to monitor the human children, partly out of scientific interest and partly out of genuine concern. Unlike her superiors, she had spent time studying human behavior and was beginning to understand the magnitude of their situation. "Are those our parents up there?" 8-year-old Emma asked, pointing toward the ceiling. Velmora checked her translation device and knelt down to the child's level. "Not your specific parents, little one, but humans who want to help you." "All of them?" 12-year-old Marcus asked. "There must be hundreds of ships." "Yes," Velmora replied, still struggling to understand it herself. "All of them." Alex Thompson, the 16-year-old trying to keep the group calm, looked at the alien technician with growing understanding. "They're not going to leave without us, are they?" Velmora's tentacles twitched in what her species used to indicate uncertainty, mixed with fear. "I don't think they're capable of leaving without you. My research suggests that humans cannot psychologically abandon threatened offspring. It's not a choice for your species. It's a biological imperative." Outside the facility, the situation was escalating beyond anyone's control. Human vessels had established orbital positions around every strategic location on the planet. Mining ships were conducting geological surveys that were actually detailed scans of the detention facility's defenses. Agricultural transports were testing atmospheric processors in ways that could easily be converted to chemical weapon delivery systems. The message was clear, even if diplomatically unstated. The humans weren't just asking for their children back, they were preparing to take them. The breaking point came when Ambassador Thelquin received an urgent transmission from his intelligence operatives throughout human space. What they reported made his crystalline features darken with something approaching panic. "Chancellor," he announced to the emergency session, "we have a problem that extends far beyond the Kepler system." The holographic assembly of alien dignitaries turned their attention to the Vegan representative as he activated a galaxy-wide display map. Hundreds of red indicators were scattered across human space, each pulsing with urgent movement. Every human colony, every human outpost, every human vessel in space has received the emergency broadcast about the detained children. But the response isn't limited to those already mobile. Our monitoring stations report massive mobilization efforts on every human world. Representative Colmath leaned forward skeptically. "Surely you're exaggerating. On Earth, their homeworld, civilian space infrastructure has been commandeered by something they call emergency parent protocols." Cargo haulers, passenger liners, even atmospheric shuttles are being converted for long-range travel. Their lunar shipyards have gone to round-the-clock production schedules producing transport vessels. Chancellor Vextari's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. How many additional vessels are we discussing? Conservative estimates suggest over 2,000 human spacecraft will be capable of reaching Kepler space within the next 72 hours. But that's not the most concerning development. Thelquin highlighted several indicators on the map. Human military forces have begun mobilizing on a scale not seen since their unification wars 2 centuries ago. Reserve units are being activated. Mothballed vessels are being brought online, and perhaps most troubling, human colonies are contributing resources without any central coordination. What do you mean? Asked Council Member Zorthak. The human colony on Tau Ceti stripped their planetary defense grid to provide additional weapons for the relief fleet. The agricultural worlds in the Centauri system are sending every transport they have, loaded with volunteers. The mining consortium at Wolf 359 has donated their entire operational fleet, crews included. Representative Colmath stood abruptly. This is impossible. No species can coordinate such a massive response without central command authority. That's exactly the point, Thelquin replied grimly. They're not coordinating it. This appears to be a spontaneous species-wide reaction. Our xenobiologists are calling it emergent protective behavior. When human offspring are threatened, the entire species treats it as a threat to their own offspring. Meanwhile, aboard the human command ship Righteous Fury, Captain Vasquez was discovering the truth of those intelligence reports firsthand. Her communications array was overwhelmed with status updates from arriving human vessels, volunteer coordination requests, and increasingly creative tactical suggestions. Ma'am, her communications officer reported, the freighter Starbound Hope has arrived with 200 volunteers from the Kepler 442c mining colony. They're requesting permission to conduct routine maintenance on our weapon systems. Routine maintenance? Captain Vasquez asked. Yes, ma'am. Apparently, their mining explosives need to be test-fired in the direction of the detention facility to ensure proper functionality. Despite the gravity of the situation, Captain Vasquez found herself almost smiling. Her species was finding increasingly creative ways to circumvent diplomatic protocols while maintaining plausible deniability. Ma'am, her tactical officer added, the agricultural transport Green Fields is requesting clearance to begin atmospheric seeding operations over the detention facility. What exactly would they be seeding? Sleep agents, ma'am. Apparently they're concerned about the air quality for the children and want to ensure everyone in the facility gets proper rest. Captain Vasquez realized that her people were essentially planning a massive, coordinated assault disguised as routine civilian operations. The frightening part was that no one had ordered this level of tactical sophistication. Humans were apparently naturally gifted at warfare when their children were threatened. On the planet's surface, Facility Commander Corvine was receiving increasingly frantic reports from his staff. The human blockade had evolved into something resembling a siege, with every approach to the planet under constant surveillance. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving over 50 transmission requests per hour from human vessels. They all contain the same message, which is, return our children and we'll leave peacefully. Continue to hold them and we'll come get them. That's a threat. Yes, sir, but it's being delivered by a woman who identifies herself as a school teacher, a man who says he's a farmer, a maintenance worker, and dozens of others. These aren't military personnel making threats. These are civilians making promises. Commander Corvain felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Military threats could be analyzed, negotiated, countered. But civilians making simple statements of fact were something entirely different. In the detention area, young Zentorian technician Velmora had become the unofficial liaison between the facility staff and the human children. Her research into human behavior had made her the only one who understood what they were witnessing. The ships in the sky, 16-year-old Alex asked. They're all here for us? Yes, Velmora replied, checking her translation device carefully. But they don't even know us. That doesn't seem to matter to your species. Our research indicates that humans respond to threatened offspring regardless of genetic relationship. You call it protective instinct, but it appears to be stronger than anything we've documented in galactic species. 12-year-old Marcus pressed his face against the viewport. watching the steady stream of ships arriving in orbit. My dad said humans don't abandon their kids, ever. He was correct, Velmora confirmed. Our intelligence suggests that human parents have historically chosen death rather than abandonment of offspring. But this situation is unprecedented. These aren't just parents. This appears to be an entire civilization responding as though you were their own children. 8-year-old Emma, who had been quietly coloring with drawing supplies Velmora had provided, looked up suddenly. Are they going to fight the bad aliens? Velmora's tentacles twitched nervously. We're not bad aliens, little one. We just didn't understand human customs regarding children, so you'll let us go home now. I hope so. What Velmora didn't tell the children was that facility sensors had detected human shuttles conducting routine system checks that were actually detailed reconnaissance of the detention center's defenses. Human vessels were performing navigation calibrations that mapped every approach route to the facility. Agricultural ships were testing air quality sensors that could easily be converted to deliver chemical agents. The humans weren't just threatening to rescue their children. They were methodically planning every detail of the operation, and they were doing it with the same careful precision they'd developed during centuries of protecting their young from predators, environmental hazards, and hostile forces. Above the planet, the newest arrival to the human fleet was perhaps the most ominous. The deep space transport family reunion had traveled from the outer colonies, carrying not soldiers or weapons, but something that made Captain Vasquez's blood run cold when she read the manifest. 3,000 human parents whose children were attending schools throughout human space. They hadn't come to negotiate or threaten or demonstrate. They'd come to show the galaxy exactly what happened when someone threatened human children. The moment that changed everything came when Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenopsychologist from Earth, made an unscheduled transmission to the detention facility. Unlike the previous military or diplomatic communications, her message was routed directly to Facility Commander Corvain's personal communication device. Commander, she began, her voice carrying an exhaustion that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate worry. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a research scientist specializing in interspecies psychology, and I need to explain something that your people don't understand. Corvain had been expecting another threatening message or diplomatic demand. Instead, he found himself listening to what sounded like a lecture. You're wondering why thousands of humans have abandoned their lives and traveled across space for children they've never met. Your intelligence analysts have probably used terms like irrational behavior or disproportionate response. You're trying to understand our actions using your species' psychological framework, but that's not going to work. The transmission continued with data streams, showing comparative analysis between human and alien child rearing patterns. Most galactic species produce offspring that reach independence quickly. Your children are essentially small adults. Human children are different. They remain completely dependent for years, partially dependent for nearly 2 decades. This has created evolutionary pressures that no other galactic species has experienced. Commander Corvain found himself genuinely interested despite the crisis. What kind of pressures? We don't just protect our own children, Commander. We've evolved to protect all children as a species-wide imperative. When humans see a threatened child, we don't calculate genetic relationships or consider cost-benefit analysis. We respond with the same intensity we would use to protect our own offspring. The transmission paused, and when Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice carried a warning that made Corvain's exoskeleton contract with concern. Commander, what you're seeing in orbit isn't a military operation or a diplomatic crisis. You've triggered a biological imperative that's operated in humanity for millions of years. Every human within 1,000 light-years is experiencing the same psychological response they would have if predators were attacking their own children. But they're not their children, Corvain protested. That's irrelevant to human psychology. We can't distinguish between our offspring and other human offspring when they're in danger. It's not a choice, Commander. It's programming that runs deeper than conscious thought. What Dr. Chen didn't mention was that her own daughter was among the detained children, and her clinical explanation was the only thing preventing her from hijacking a shuttle and attempting a solo rescue mission. Aboard the command ship, Captain Vasquez was receiving updates that confirmed Dr. Chen's analysis. The human response was growing beyond anything that could be contained by military or diplomatic means. Ma'am, her intelligence officer reported. We're detecting significant movement from human space. The transport Endless Journey has arrived carrying 500 volunteers from the outer colonies. The cargo hauler Determination reports she's carrying combat engineers from the Luna Military Academy, who are officially on vacation. Volunteers on vacation? Captain Vasquez asked. Yes, ma'am. Apparently half the Luna Military Academy requested emergency leave when they heard about the detained children. Their professors came with them. The tactical display showed the continuing arrival of human vessels, but the newer ships were different. These weren't cargo haulers hastily converted for long-range travel. These were purpose-built military vessels that had been recalled from deep space assignments. Ma'am, the communications officer added, we're also receiving a transmission from Admiral Patricia Morrison aboard the dreadnought Unbreakable Will. She's requesting permission to assume overall command of the operation. Captain Vasquez felt relief and concern in equal measure. Admiral Morrison was one of the most respected officers in the human defense fleet, but her presence meant that Earth's military command had officially acknowledged what was happening in Kepler space. Put her through. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Morrison's stern features. Behind her, Captain Vasquez could see the bridge of a Titan-class dreadnought, the largest warship in the human fleet. Captain Vasquez, I'm assuming command of this operation under Emergency Protocol 7. What's the current status of the detained children? They're alive and unharmed according to our intelligence, ma'am. The aliens seem genuinely confused about why we're reacting this way. Of course they are, Admiral Morrison replied grimly. Captain, are you aware that we now have over 3,000 human vessels converging on this system? 3,000? Captain Vasquez felt the number hit her like a physical blow, and growing. Every human colony, every human outpost, every human ship in space has contributed something to this operation. We have farmers carrying mining explosives, teachers armed with industrial cutters, and grandparents piloting shuttles they learned to fly yesterday. The Admiral's expression grew more serious. Captain, I need you to understand something. This operation is no longer under government control. We're not coordinating it. We're just trying to prevent it from becoming a massacre. In the detention facility, the situation was reaching a crisis point. The 12 human children had been moved to the facility's maximum security wing, not as punishment but as protection. Other alien detainees had become increasingly agitated as reports of the orbital blockade spread throughout the facility. Why are there so many ships? A young Rigelian detainee asked Velmora during her rounds. The humans want their children back, she explained, still struggling to understand the magnitude of the response herself. Just for 12 juveniles? My species would send perhaps one diplomatic vessel. Velmora checked her data pad, reviewing the latest intelligence reports about human behavior. Humans are different. Their research indicates that they've never abandoned offspring in their entire evolutionary history. Not once, not under any circumstances. The Rigelian's sensory stalks twitched in confusion. Never, even when facing superior force. Especially when facing superior force. Our historians have found records of individual humans fighting entire armies to protect children. They have documented cases where human parents chose certain death rather than abandon offspring to predators. That's irrational. Perhaps. But it's also why there are 3,000 human ships in orbit and more arriving every hour. Meanwhile, Commander Corvain was discovering that his communication with Dr. Chen had opened a floodgate of information from human space. Educational transmissions about human child development, psychological studies about parental bonding, and historical analyses of human protective behavior. The most disturbing document was a comparative study showing how humans had responded to threats against children throughout their history. The pattern was consistent and terrifying. When human children were threatened, the response escalated until the threat was eliminated, regardless of the cost. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a new type of transmission from the human fleet. What kind? Personal messages. Audio recordings from human parents addressed to their children. Commander Corvain listened to a few of the recordings and felt something he'd never experienced before. The voices carried a combination of love, fear, determination, and absolute certainty that made his exoskeleton contract with involuntary reaction. Mommy and Daddy are coming, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer. We're going to bring you home, son. I promise. Tell Emma that Grandma loves her and we're all coming to get her. What made the recording so disturbing wasn't the emotion they contained. It was the complete absence of doubt. These humans weren't hoping to rescue their children or planning to negotiate for their release. They were stating simple facts about what was going to happen. Commander Corvain activated his emergency communication link to Union Command. "This is Facility Commander Corvain requesting immediate authorization to release all human detainees." The reply came back within minutes. "Request denied. Maintain standard processing procedures. Sir, we have over 3,000 human vessels in the system and more arriving hourly. This situation is beyond our capability to contain. Commander, if we capitulate to this show of force, it establishes a precedent that any species can ignore Union authority through military intimidation. With respect, sir, I don't think this is military intimidation. Our intelligence suggests this is something else entirely. Explain." Commander Corvain looked at his data displays showing the human fleet disposition, the psychological profiles of human protective behavior, and the continuing stream of arriving vessels, sir. I think we've accidentally declared war on human children. And from everything I've learned about this species, that's a war we cannot win. The final act began when Chancellor Vexitari of the Galactic Union received an unprecedented communication from Earth's President Chen Martinez. Unlike previous diplomatic exchanges, this message was broadcast simultaneously to every government in known space. To the leadership of the Galactic Union and all member species, President Martinez began, her voice carrying a weight that made even alien dignitaries pause their other activities. "I am speaking to you now not as Earth's president, but as the representative of a species that has reached the limits of diplomatic patience." The holographic transmission showed President Martinez standing before what appeared to be the largest gathering of humans in history, representatives from every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost filled a massive assembly hall that had been hastily constructed for this moment. 72 hours ago, 12 human children on an educational trip were detained by Union authorities for a navigation error. We have requested their release through proper diplomatic channels. We have provided extensive documentation about human child protection customs. We have explained our species' psychological framework regarding offspring welfare. President Martinez paused, and when she continued, her voice carried an edge that made even the most experienced alien diplomats uncomfortable. Our requests have been denied. Our customs have been dismissed as irrelevant. Our children remain in detention. Behind her, the massive assembly of humans remained completely silent, but their presence was somehow more threatening than any military demonstration could have been. Therefore, I am making this final communication to inform you that diplomatic solutions are no longer possible. In 1 hour, human forces will begin recovery operations to retrieve our children. We strongly recommend that all non-essential personnel evacuate the detention facility. The transmission ended, and across known space, alien governments suddenly realized they were witnessing something that had never occurred in galactic history. An entire species had collectively decided that diplomatic law was less important than their children's welfare. Aboard Admiral Morrison's flagship, the countdown to operational commencement had begun. What she was commanding wasn't really a military operation. It was more like a natural disaster that happened to involve spacecraft. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "all human vessels report ready for operation. We have 4,700 ships in position." 4,700. Even Admiral Morrison was stunned by the number. "Yes, ma'am. We have everything from dreadnoughts to converted pleasure craft." The mining consortium from Asteroid Belt Station Delta sent their entire fleet. The agricultural worlds contributed every transport they had. Even the Deep Space Research Station sent their shuttles. Admiral Morrison looked at her tactical display, seeing the largest human fleet in history arranged around a single detention facility. "Any response from the aliens?" "Yes, ma'am. The facility commander is requesting permission to release the children immediately. And Union Command? Still refusing to authorize release. They're calling our operation illegal military action and threatening sanctions." Admiral Morrison almost laughed despite the gravity of the situation. "Sanctions. They're threatening to punish us economically for rescuing our children." What the alien leadership didn't understand was that economic pressure was meaningless to a species that had abandoned their entire economy to rescue 12 children. Human colonies had stripped their defense grids. Human businesses had closed their operations. Human families had spent their life savings on transportation to Kepler space. On the planet's surface, Commander Corvain was frantically trying to contact Union Command as his sensors detected the beginning of the human operation. It wasn't an assault. It was something far more systematic and terrifying. "Sir," his sensor technician reported, "human vessels are deploying recovery teams at 17 different locations around the facility." 17 locations? Why so many? "Sir, they appear to be creating redundant extraction routes. Each team is capable of reaching the children independently." Commander Corvain realized that the humans weren't just planning to rescue their children. They were planning to ensure that nothing could prevent that rescue. No single point of failure, no choke point that could be defended. No way to stop them except by agreeing to release the children voluntarily. In the detention area, Velamora had gathered the 12 human children in the facility's safest location. She'd spent the past hour explaining to them what was about to happen. "Your people are coming for you," she said simply. "All of them?" 8-year-old Emma asked, wide-eyed. "All of them." 16-year-old Alex Thompson looked at the alien technician with growing understanding. "You're scared, aren't you?" Velamora's tentacles twitched nervously. "Yes, not of being hurt. Your people have been very clear that they only want their children back. I'm scared because we've learned something about your species that the rest of the galaxy isn't going to understand." "What?" "That you're willing to fight the entire galaxy for 12 children you've never met. That means you'll do anything for children you have met. It means that human children are probably the safest offspring in the known universe. Because threatening them triggers a response that no military force in the galaxy could stop." Outside, the first human shuttles were beginning their approach to the facility, but they weren't coming with weapons blazing or dramatic threats. They were coming the way human parents had always come for their children. Carefully, systematically, and with absolute determination. The lead shuttle's pilot, a woman named Maria Santos who had left her job as a school administrator to volunteer for the mission, opened a communication channel to the facility. "Detention Facility Command, this is Human Recovery Team Alpha. We're here to pick up our children. Please have them ready for transport." The casual tone of the message was somehow more intimidating than any military demand could have been. The humans weren't requesting or negotiating or threatening. They were simply informing the facility that they'd arrived to collect their offspring. Commander Corvain made a decision that probably saved both his career and interspecies relations. Without waiting for authorization from Union Command, he activated the facility-wide communication system. "All personnel, this is Commander Corvain. Release the human juveniles immediately. Escort them to the main landing bay and ensure their safety during transfer to their people." "Sir," his security chief protested, "Union Command specifically ordered us to maintain standard processing procedures." "Union Command isn't here," Corvain replied firmly. "I am. And I'm not going to be responsible for starting the first interspecies war in galactic history, because we were too stubborn to return 12 children to their parents." 20 minutes later, 12 human children walked across the landing bay toward a waiting shuttle, piloted by people who had traveled across space for them. The children were scared, tired, and homesick, but they were safe. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying its precious cargo toward the human fleet, something remarkable happened. The 4,700 human vessels that had converged on Kepler space didn't celebrate or make victory announcements or issue triumphant declarations. They simply turned around and went home. The children were safe. That was all that mattered. 3 months later, the Galactic Union quietly amended its detention procedures to include special provisions for human juveniles. Not because of diplomatic pressure or military threats, but because every species in the galaxy had learned a simple truth about humanity: never mess with human children. Ever.